Why feeling lost is actually your soul searching for something real. There's a particular kind of panic that arrives in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. You're sitting at your desk, or driving your usual route home, or standing in your kitchen making dinner for the 1000th time, and suddenly you feel it. A vertigo that has nothing to do with heights. The ground beneath your feet feels solid, but inside you're falling. Everything in your life looks the same from the outside, same job, same relationships, same routines. But something fundamental has shifted. You don't know who you are anymore. You don't know what you want. You don't even know what questions to ask to figure it out. Most of us have been taught to fear this feeling. We call it depression or a quarter, life crisis or burnout. We medicate it, distract ourselves from it, or white knuckle our way through it, waiting for the feeling to pass. We treat it like a malfunction, a bug in the system that needs to be fixed as quickly as possible. But what if this feeling of being lost isn't a breakdown at all? What if it's actually a break through the first tremor of an earthquake that's trying to reshape your inner landscape? What if your soul is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, searching for something real in a life that's become a carefully constructed illusion? Today, we're going to explore a possibility that might change everything. That feeling lost isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's a sign that something's finally going right. Let me introduce you to someone. Let's call her Maya. On paper, Maya's life looks perfect. She graduated with honors, landed a prestigious job at a consulting firm, lives in a beautiful apartment in a desirable neighborhood. She's in a long-term relationship with someone who checks all the boxes. Her Instagram feed is a carefully curated gallery of brunch dates, vacation photos, and work achievements. Friends tell her they're jealous of her life. Her parents are proud. She should be happy. But Maya wakes up every morning with a sensation she can't quite name. It's not sadness exactly. It's more like living behind glass. She can see her life happening, but she can't feel it. She goes through the motions with increasing detachment. The conversations at work feel hollow. The relationship feels like a performance she's too tired to continue. Even the things she used to enjoy, traveling, seeing friends, hitting her fitness goals, have become items to check off a list that someone else wrote. Late at night, when she can't sleep, Maya scrolls through her phone and feels a strange homesickness. Except she doesn't know what home she's missing. She's never been there. She just knows that wherever she is now, it isn't the right place. But here's the trap. She can't identify what's wrong. There's no obvious problem to solve, no clear villain to blame, no dramatic trauma to process. Just this persistent, gnawing sense that she's living someone else's life, and she doesn't know how to find her way back to her own. Sound familiar? Maybe you're not Maya, but you've felt echoes of this disorientation, that uncanny feeling of being a stranger to yourself, of looking in the mirror and seeing a face you recognize but a person you don't quite know, of answering "I'm fine" automatically while some deeper part of you whispers that nothing is fine at all. We live in a culture that's terrified of this feeling. The self-help industry offers 1,000 solutions: productivity hacks, manifestation techniques, positive affirmations, goal-setting frameworks. Find your passion, they tell us, follow your dreams. But what if you've lost touch with what your actual passions are? What if the dreams you've been following were never really yours to begin with? Here's what makes this experience so disorienting. It's not that your life is bad. It's that it feels false. Like you've been cast in a play you never auditioned for, reading lines from a script you didn't write, and only now are you realizing you're acting. The audience applauds your performance, but you've forgotten who you are underneath the costume. This feeling of being lost usually arrives at a threshold moment. Maybe you've achieved the goal you spent years working toward and felt nothing. Maybe a relationship ended and you realized you're not sure who you are outside of it. Maybe you turned 30 or 40 or 50, and suddenly the future you've been racing toward looks empty. Or maybe there was no dramatic event at all, just a slow accumulation of small compromises, tiny betrayals of self, until one day you woke up and didn't recognize the person you'd become. The conventional response is to treat this as a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. We're supposed to have it figured out. We're supposed to know ourselves. Being lost is seen as a failure of planning, discipline, or self-knowledge. So we panic. We make impulsive changes, quit the job, end the relationship, move to a new city hoping that external rearrangement will quiet the internal chaos. Or we do the opposite, we double down. We convince ourselves that we just need to be more grateful, more disciplined, more committed to the path we're on. We tell ourselves that this feeling of displacement is just weakness, immaturity, or self-indulgence. We force ourselves to keep going, keep performing, keep pretending, and the sense of being lost deepens into a kind of despair. But what if we're misunderstanding the whole experience? What if feeling lost isn't the problem? It's the solution to a problem we haven't fully grasped yet. Carl Jung spent his life exploring the territories of the human psyche that most of us fear to enter, and he understood something crucial about this experience of feeling lost. It's not random. It's not meaningless. It's the psyche's way of telling you that you've strayed too far from your authentic self, and it's trying to bring you back. Jung called the journey toward wholeness individuation. It's the central task of the second half of life, though it can begin at any age. Individuation is the process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you've been conditioned to be. And here's the paradox Jung recognized. The journey always begins with disorientation. You have to get lost from the false self before you can find the true one. Think about it this way. For most of our lives, we're constructing what Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world. The persona is necessary. It's how we function in society, how we meet expectations, how we present an acceptable face to others. You have a work persona, a family persona, a friend persona. These aren't lies exactly, but they're not the whole truth either. They're carefully edited versions of yourself, designed to win approval, avoid conflict, and maintain social harmony. The problem arises when we mistake the persona for the self, when we've worn the mask for so long that we forget there's a face underneath. We optimize the performance and lose touch with the performer. We become so skilled at being who others need us to be that we have no idea who we actually are. This is where the feeling of being lost originates. It's not that you don't know who you are. It's that the person you've been presenting to the world and to yourself is an imposter. And some part of you, the part Jung called the self, is trying to get your attention. It's creating discomfort, restlessness, anxiety, depression, anything to make you stop sleepwalking through your own life. Jung understood that the psyche has its own intelligence. It operates through what he called compensation. When your conscious attitude becomes too one-sided, too far from your authentic nature, the unconscious compensates by creating symptoms, dreams, or overwhelming emotions that force you to pay attention. Feeling lost is one of those compensations. It's your psyche's emergency brake, engaging because you're heading in the wrong direction. Now here's where it gets deeper. The reason you feel lost isn't just because you've abandoned your authentic self. It's because you've abandoned parts of yourself that you've deemed unacceptable. Jung called this rejected material the shadow, all the aspects of yourself that don't fit the image you're trying to maintain. Maybe you've always presented yourself as confident and competent, so you've pushed away any vulnerability or uncertainty. Maybe you've built an identity around being responsible and put together, so you've exiled your wildness, your spontaneity, your need for play. Maybe you've prided yourself on being rational and controlled, so you've suppressed your emotions, your intuition, your creative impulses. These rejected parts don't disappear. They go underground into the unconscious, where they form the shadow. And the shadow grows stronger the more you ignore it. It begins to influence your behavior in ways you don't recognize: sudden anger, inexplicable attractions, mysterious sabotage of your own goals. You start feeling like you're at war with yourself, and you are. The parts of you that you've tried to eliminate are fighting for recognition. Feeling lost is often the moment when the shadow can no longer be ignored. Your carefully constructed identity starts to crack because it's too narrow, too limiting, to contain the fullness of who you are. The persona is failing, and the disorientation you feel is actually the beginning of a more authentic alignment with yourself. Jung wrote about a stage in individuation he called the confrontation with the unconscious. It's a descent, a dark night, a period of chaos where old certainties dissolve and nothing new has emerged yet to replace them. This is terrifying. We want to skip this part, to jump straight to resolution. But Jung insisted that this dissolution is necessary. You can't build a true self on the foundation of a false one. The false structure has to come down first. This is why all the quick, fixed solutions fail. Positive thinking, goal setting, lifestyle optimization, they're all trying to renovate the persona, to make the mask more comfortable. But the psyche isn't interested in a more comfortable mask. It's interested in taking the mask off entirely. Jung also spoke of what happens when we refuse this call to transformation. He called it the unlived life, the person you could have become but didn't, because you were too afraid to let go of who you thought you should be. The unlived life doesn't stay dormant, it haunts you. It manifests as depression, addiction, bitterness, a sense of life slipping away while you watch from the sidelines. The feeling of being lost is actually your unlived life making itself known. It's the future self you could become, calling to the person you currently are, creating tension that can only be resolved through transformation. Jung would say that your soul, that deepest, most essential part of you, is searching for something real, because it knows the life you're living isn't it. But here's the hope embedded in Jung's framework. This searching isn't aimless. The psyche knows where it's trying to go, even if your conscious mind doesn't. The feeling of being lost is actually a form of guidance. It's telling you that you're off course, yes, but implicit in that message is the truth that there is a course, a path that's authentically yours. You just have to be willing to enter the uncertainty and trust that the disorientation is leading you somewhere true. The existential philosophers understood this crisis from a different angle, but they arrived at similar territory. Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death, a despair that comes not from having a difficult life, but from failing to become yourself. He saw that we have a choice. We can live inauthentically in what he called despair, or we can take the leap into authentic selfhood, which requires courage precisely because there are no guarantees. Kierkegaard recognized that most people never make this leap. They live what he called the aesthetic life, moving from distraction to distraction, experience to experience, never fully committing to anything, never fully becoming anyone. Or they live the ethical life, following rules, meeting obligations, doing what they're supposed to do, but without any deeper questioning of whether these are truly their obligations to meet. The feeling of being lost often arrives as a signal that these modes of existence are no longer sustainable. Something in you is demanding more. What Kierkegaard called the religious or authentic life is remarkably similar to Jung's individuation. It's the willingness to stand in your own truth, even when that truth isolates you from the crowd, even when it means disappointing people, even when it means admitting you've been wrong about who you are. Friedrich Nietzsche approached this from yet another direction. He wrote about the last man, the person who wants only comfort, safety, and the approval of others. The last man has made himself small to fit into society's expectations. He's traded the possibility of greatness, of becoming who he truly is, for the security of being like everyone else. And Nietzsche saw this as a kind of death while still breathing. Nietzsche's famous declaration that God is dead is often misunderstood. He wasn't celebrating. He was warning that without the old certainties, without inherited meaning and purpose, we'd have to become the creators of our own values. This is both liberation and terrifying responsibility. When you feel lost, you're standing in that void Nietzsche described, the place where old meanings have collapsed and new ones haven't yet emerged. He called this the crisis of nihilism, and he believed most people would fail it. They'd either retreat into comfortable lies or collapse into despair. But for those willing to face it, Nietzsche offered a vision he called the Übermensch, not a Superman in the fascist sense, but a person who has overcome the conditioning of the herd, who has created their own values, who has said yes to their own existence, even with all its suffering and uncertainty. The feeling of being lost is the threshold to this transformation. It's the ego's resistance to the soul's evolution. Eastern philosophy offers yet another lens. Buddhism speaks of the self as a construct, a story we tell ourselves that creates suffering. The feeling of being lost might be understood as the dissolution of this constructed self, which Buddhism sees not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. When the false self breaks down, there's a chance to realize your true nature, what some traditions call Buddha nature, or original mind. The Zen tradition in particular embraces this uncertainty. There's a concept called beginner's mind, approaching life without preconceptions, without the false confidence that you know who you are or how things should be. From this perspective, feeling lost isn't something to overcome. It's a state of openness, of possibility, of being willing to see freshly rather than through the lens of old conditioning. The Taoist texts speak of wu-wei, effortless action, going with the flow of your true nature rather than forcing yourself into shapes that don't fit. When you feel lost according to external measures of success, you might actually be found according to the deeper wisdom of the Tao. You're no longer striving toward artificial goals that were never yours. You're in the space where your authentic path can emerge. There's a recurring pattern across these philosophical traditions, the recognition that human beings tend to live inauthentically, that we construct false selves to meet social demands, and that there comes a moment when this construction can no longer hold. What looks like falling apart is actually the possibility of coming together differently, more honestly, more wholly, more in alignment with who you actually are. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the ways we lie to ourselves about our freedom and responsibility. We pretend we have no choice, that we're simply following the script we've been given. Feeling lost can be understood as the moment when bad faith becomes untenable. You can't quite believe your own lies anymore. The script you've been reading doesn't feel like your words. Sartre insisted that we are condemned to be free, that we have no essential nature dictating who we must be. and this radical freedom is both our burden and our opportunity. The anxiety that comes with feeling lost is what Sartre would recognize as existential anxiety, the vertigo of confronting your freedom to choose who you will become. But here's what all these philosophers understood that our contemporary culture often misses. This isn't a crisis to be solved with a weekend retreat or a new planner system. This is the central challenge of human existence. The question isn't whether you'll face it, but when, and whether you'll have the courage to face it honestly. What these traditions offer is a reframe. Feeling lost isn't a deviation from the path. It's not a sign that you've failed at life. It's the path itself at its most crucial juncture. It's the necessary disorientation that precedes reorientation. It's the darkness before the dawn, except the dawn isn't a return to what was before. It's an emergence of something entirely new, an authentic self that was waiting beneath all the layers of conditioning, performance, and pretense. The real question becomes, can you tolerate not knowing who you are long enough to discover who you actually are? Can you sit in the discomfort of uncertainty without rushing to rebuild the familiar prison of the false self? Can you trust that the feeling of being lost is not abandonment by life, but an invitation into it? Section 4. Practical integration 4-5 minutes. So how does this actually show up in your life? How do you work with this feeling of being lost rather than against it? First, you have to recognize that the discomfort you're feeling is information, not an enemy. Your psyche is speaking to you in the only language it has: sensation, emotion, restlessness, dreams, symptoms. When you feel lost, your first instinct might be to distract yourself, to numb out, to busy yourself with activities that prevent you from feeling the full weight of the uncertainty. But this is exactly what extends the crisis. The faster you run from the feeling, the longer you stay lost. Instead, there's a practice of turning toward it. This doesn't mean wallowing or ruminating. It means getting curious. What exactly is this feeling telling you? When you sit quietly with it, what does it reveal? Often, you'll notice that underneath "I feel lost," there are more specific truths. I don't want this job, even though it looks good on paper. This relationship feels safe, but not alive. I've been living according to someone else's values, and I don't even know what mine are. You might notice that certain parts of your life drain you in ways you've been ignoring. Not just tired, depleted, like something essential is being extracted and you're left hollow. Jung would say these are the parts of your life that are feeding the persona at the expense of the self. The mask is getting heavier, and it takes more energy to keep it in place. The second practice is what Jung called active imagination, a creating space to dialogue with the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. This isn't about having conversations in your head where you already know all the answers. It's about genuine listening. You might write, asking your soul what it's searching for, and then get out of the way and let whatever wants to emerge, emerge. You might notice recurring images in your dreams. You might pay attention to what you're drawn to when you're not trying to be productive or impressive. This process often reveals the shadow. You start to see the qualities you've rejected. Maybe you've been so focused on being strong that you've lost touch with your vulnerability. Maybe you've been so committed to being rational that you've exiled your intuition. Maybe you've been so determined to be good that you've suppressed your anger, your desires, your complexity. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean becoming those qualities exclusively. It means making them conscious, giving them a place at the table, allowing them to inform your choices rather than sabotaging them from the unconscious. You might notice that as you do this, you become less predictable to yourself and others. this is actually a sign of wholeness. You're containing more of your contradictions rather than editing them out. Here's what's difficult. Other people often won't like this. The people in your life have grown accustomed to your persona. They've built expectations around who you are, or who they need you to be. When you start to change, when you start to honor truths about yourself that you've been suppressing, there will be pushback. Some relationships will need to renegotiate. Some might end. This is part of why feeling lost is so destabilizing. It's not just about your internal experience. It ripples out into every aspect of your life. You have to be willing to disappoint people, not carelessly, not cruelly, but as a necessary consequence of becoming real. Jung wrote that individuation is often a lonely path because you're stepping away from collective norms, from the safety of being like everyone else. You're choosing authenticity over approval, and that comes with a cost. But here's what begins to happen when you stay with this process. You start to feel more alive. Not happier, necessarily, at least not at first, but more present, more here. Colors are brighter. Conversations have more depth. You're not watching your life from behind glass anymore. You're in it. You'll also notice that decisions become clearer, not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you're asking different questions. Instead of "what should I do?" or "what would be most successful?" you're asking what feels true, what aligns with who I actually am. These questions don't always lead to comfortable answers, but they lead to authentic ones. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. There will be moments of clarity followed by months of confusion, breakthroughs followed by backsliding. This isn't failure. This is how the psyche works. Jung described individuation as a spiral rather than a straight line. You circle back to the same issues at deeper levels, integrating more each time. What you're looking for isn't a final destination where you have yourself completely figured out. That's another trap of the ego, wanting to nail down your identity once and for all. What you're moving toward is a different relationship with yourself, one where you can hold uncertainty, where you can be multiple things, where you can evolve without losing your center. You might find that your sense of purpose shifts. It's less about achieving external markers of success and more about living with integrity, which literally means wholeness, being integrated rather than fragmented. Purpose becomes less about what you do and more about who you are as you do it. So what does it look like on the other side? Not the other side, as in finished, complete, arrived, but the other side of this particular threshold, this particular dark night of the soul. First, there's a kind of homecoming, not to a place you've been before, but to yourself. You recognize that the person you are now is someone you've always been, underneath all the layers of conditioning. There's a feeling of, oh, there you are, rather than, oh, I've become someone new. The frantic searching quiets because you're no longer looking outside yourself for validation, purpose, or direction. You're sourcing it from within. Your relationship with uncertainty changes. You're still uncomfortable sometimes, still unsure, but it doesn't feel like an emergency. You can tolerate not knowing because you've learned to trust the process of discovery. You've seen that confusion often precedes clarity, that disorientation is part of reorientation. The exhaustion that comes from maintaining the persona begins to lift. You're not performing anymore, or at least not in the same way. There's less distance between who you are in private and who you are in public. This doesn't mean you're identical in every context. Jung knew that we all have different faces we present in different situations. But the gap between them shrinks. The mask becomes lighter because it's more accurate, more reflective of who you actually are. You find yourself capable of holding contradictions. You can be strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, happy and sad at the same time. Instead of splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts, you're integrated. Whole doesn't mean perfect. It means including more of what's true, even when it's messy or complicated. Relationships shift. Some deepen because they can finally be based on who you actually are rather than who you were pretending to be. Others fall away, and while this might be painful, there's also relief. You're no longer carrying the burden of maintaining connections that require you to stay small, stay false, stay stuck. New relationships form on different ground. You attract people who resonate with your authenticity rather than your persona. There's more depth, more honesty, more room for both people to be fully themselves. You become more comfortable with your own company. That feeling of being a stranger to yourself dissolves. You know yourself now, not completely, not finally, but enough. Enough to trust yourself. Enough to be curious about who you're still becoming rather than afraid of who you might discover. There's grief in this transformation, too. Grief for the time you spent disconnected from yourself. Grief for the choices you made from the false self. Grief for the person you thought you were supposed to be, who you're now letting die. Jung recognized that every transformation involves a death, the death of who you were, and you have to allow yourself to mourn that, even as you're being born into something more true. But alongside the grief, there's aliveness, a sense of possibility that wasn't there before. You're not locked into a script anymore. You're improvising, responding, creating your life rather than just executing a plan someone else wrote. The world itself looks different, not because it's changed, but because you're seeing it with new eyes that are finally your own rather than borrowed from parents, culture, expectations, fears. You notice beauty you couldn't see before. You're moved by things that previously left you numb. You're awake. Remember Maya from the beginning of this journey, the woman with the perfect life who woke up every morning feeling like a stranger to herself. Here's what her story might look like now. She's not in that consulting job anymore. She's not in that relationship. Her Instagram looks messier, less curated. Her parents are confused. Her friends don't quite know what to say. But Maya knows something she didn't before. She knows what it feels like to be real. She knows the difference between approval and authenticity. She knows that feeling lost was never the problem. Staying on the wrong path, just because it looked right from the outside, that was the problem. She's still uncertain about many things. She doesn't have it all figured out. But she's no longer trying to. She's in conversation with herself now, with her soul, with that deep inner knowing that she'd been drowning out with achievement and performance and the constant maintenance of an image. When you feel lost, you're standing at the same threshold Maya stood at. Your soul is searching for something real, something more true than the life you've been performing, more authentic than the self you've been presenting, more whole than the fragmented parts you've been willing to show. This searching isn't punishment. It's not a sign that you've failed. It's a sign that you're ready for something deeper, something more honest, something actually yours. It's your psyche's way of saying, the person you've been pretending to be can't contain who you actually are anymore. The mask is cracking, and underneath it, your real face is waiting to be seen. The journey from here isn't about finding yourself as if you're a lost set of keys. You're not lost, you're buried. And the feeling of being lost is the beginning of excavation, the first tremor that says, there's someone real underneath all this performance, all this pretense, all these layers of should and ought and supposed to be. Your soul is searching for something real. What if the thing it's searching for is you?